Alright, so here's a top 10 list of rather how to make video games easier or rather harder, and kind of like what to get you thinking about, if you're somebody who wants to go into actual game designing. Because from my experience, I'm going to tell you something. I've either played, some people say that video games aren't like too easy, but they're not too hard either. Like there's a mixed difficulty, but it's like I've noticed that it's like either games are too easy or they're too hard. But like, I still beat them regardless. But like, I'm not kidding you. Like there's literally some games that like I've noticed that some games are harder, like that are really good, that are really hard because like maybe somebody didn't play tested it enough in some aspects. Like not to balance out the difficulty, but it just seems like, I don't know if it's like it's really hard to tell like with some games because like it could have been like maybe the game designers really didn't check the overall capabilities of it, but it's like it's really amazing like how people don't really check some of these things like when they design these things. So this is going to give you a reason like this is going to be a top 10 like how to make games easier or harder based on your overall performance of the game. So for example, we'll talk about like computer simulation versus human reflex, the best they can emulate it to the best of their abilities. So anyways, when you think about like certain games, probably one of the first things that we should always talk about is like the program itself that the game is built on. So like the engine that the game is built on. Well, okay, so if you're gonna make a game, it's important that when you make a game that the CPU as well as the overall player should have like the same abilities that are built on the same. I mean, unless of course like it really isn't something that you can't do. Like for example, like take racing games for example. Okay, like rubber banding AI for example. If the CPU is going to go a certain speed, I mean, as long as they can go a speed that you can achieve, then and that should be the fair. It shouldn't be like the CPU is able to do like certain things that you can, and then it's like it affects like the difficulty because there's nothing you can really do about it. I'll give you an example. Luck. Luck is another factor that really sucks because some people have made some. I mean, maybe it wasn't the controls, but it would be like the overall capability of like what the AI is able to doing because like they got these advantages like like luck based. You see this all the time in Mario Kart, for example. It's more of like it's like one of the reasons I don't play Mario Kart anymore, really for the most part, because like every time you race against like the CPU, for example, it seems like rather than it being skill, it's more luck based. And it screws you over because like in some Mario Kart games like Mario Kart Wii for example, not the one on the Wii U and not Mario Kart 8, but there were times when like they would make a Mario Kart game, Nintendo would make a Mario Kart game, and like like there were certain like you could if you're a true hardcore gamer, you would go for like all the achievements in the game. And one of the achievements in Mario Kart 3, it goes back to the Mario Kart DS, but it was like you could get 3 stars next to your name. Of course it's like you really can't get it nowadays because you can't really race with people online. So I mean, I don't know about Mario Kart 7 and 8 if they do the same thing, but the problem was though you had to achieve like there was a hidden counter, and depending on how you get the points, like you had to get 1,000 points or higher in order to achieve it. But but what happened was Mario Kart was like when they achieved this, Mario Kart was essentially like you had to stay in first place. You didn't have to hit walls. You couldn't fall off the ledges, and you essentially like the more you were in first place, the more points you got. I forget exactly how it determined this and how many people you hit with items, and then they penalize you if you got ran over by items. But it's like sometimes it sucked because like like take like something like Rainbow Road and like the light and heavyweight classes. Like all they had to do was like I remember like Wario would always like come up behind me and somebody flying right off the stage, and like I'd still get first place, but I didn't have enough points. I must have got like 900 and something. And it was just like it kept giving me the 2 stars because the game kept throwing you off the ledge because it wasn't really balanced with the classes. But it's weird because like when you play Mario Kart, it seems like the AI, the way it's programmed, the way they go on their little paths that they're designed to do, it's like the AI, gets all these advantages because it can take like the heavyweights, like take like Mario Kart 64 for example. Like when you'd play like Wario or Bowser or King Koopa if you want to go by the Japanese name, you might notice how they're really hard to control in some cases because they're supposed to be like the worst characters to use from what I understand. But what's really interesting though is, but if the AI uses it, it's like you'll notice how it's completely different. It's supposed to be like that to give you a challenge. But it's really interesting because like some games they don't do this. Like computer AI only advantages. Like so essentially what you want to do is you don't want to make a game where the controls are sort of like bad for you, but like the computer AI can just deal with it either way because it doesn't have to deal with those. And of course, you want to balance out the RNG, you want to balance out I mean, if you're going to make a hard game, it has to be a game that you can reasonably be beat. It doesn't have to rely on luck aspects in order to screw you over. It should be something that, it's fair in its own aspect, but at the same time though it's fast though if you want to really beat it. F-Zero is a good example of this. Or fuck it, it's a perfect example. You could be like somebody who plays F-Zero, right? And you'll notice how like you'll play like novice, real easy, play master difficulty, everybody passes you because they're going fast. But eventually, depending on how good you are, you eventually can beat them. So it's almost like the game designers really didn't understand. Or the players rather don't really understand if maybe the game is just you gotta get lucky, or maybe you just gotta be really good at those games. And those games are really hardcore difficult. But I'm not saying they should turn the difficulty down. I'm just saying that they should. You should, like, again, that's a good example. Like, you could rely on luck in those cases, and there is no luck there. But what I'm saying is, that's how you make a hard game. If you want a game that's hard, you have to be better than it somehow. You got to do what most people don't think they're capable of doing. So there's that. And another aspect of, like certain games that are more difficult than they should be. Not because you can't beat them, but because of maybe technical difficulties, like glitches and whatnot. I mean, it kind of like take like GoldenEye and Perfect Dark for the N64. I wouldn't really complain about the lag in the games, but what's really interesting is like you play like Perfect Agent, and then you have like, a Double Agent. And you'll notice how, like, the enemies, like, they can just, like, there's, like, certain guns, they can just kill you really instantaneous. Like, in GoldenEye, like, once you get up to, like, the last levels with, like, ZMG guards and all that, and they can just, like, shoot you, like, 7 times in, like, one round, and it's, like, they shouldn't be able to do that. They can just, like, fucking annihilate you in just one fucking sitting. And it's, like, and it's bullshit because, like, they're all rapid-fire fucking guns. And, I mean, I get that Rareware was trying new things, and they really were, but it's like you gotta, like, when you play those games, man, like, that was a perfect example of a game that if you did not know what you were doing, you could still fucking die, and even if you did, you'd still be fucked. Some of those games are just not easy, but then again, you could, like, this is an example of, like, what not to do in a game, you gotta balance it out. Like, I mean, there would be people that they'd be playing that game, and they just get their ass handed to them in, like, 30 seconds, and like, Perfect Dark's another good example of this, perfect example, no pun intended, but it's like, this is what you don't do, like, you raise the enemy accuracy, like, all the way up to, like, near 100%, and mind you, the closest it is to 100%, the better chance you have of getting shot, and I think it also has something to do with, like, the lower it is, the better chance, like, the longer, I mean, not just because the bullets can miss, but, like, there's a better chance that you're not going to take damage too, because it's kind of like a timer. Like, I've seen in some cases where, like, people will be playing GoldenEye or Perfect Dark, and if the enemy accuracy is, like down to 10% or something like that, but, like, if you're playing, like, the Aztec level where it's got, like, the highest percentage, it's like, they never miss, obviously, but it's like, there have been times when, like, just because the bullets hit you doesn't necessarily mean they hit you or it counts as a hit. I've noticed that in some GoldenEye videos that I've recorded in the past. or when I was recording them, it seems like depending on, how many bullets are shot, and depending on how much time passes that they're sitting there continuously firing at you, it's almost like a second chance to get out of the way to prevent taking damage. I know that kind of sounds stupid, but it's weird because like I've played GoldenEye sometimes, and I mean like without the incivility cheat code sometimes, and I've noticed that I swear it's like it's got to be like a weird glitch or something, but it's like the physics engine in that game is just it's difficult to put into words. It's like they'll shoot you, sometimes they'll hit you, but it won't do any damage. And what's funny is like when you play GoldenEye, it's like you're supposed to kill the guards, but then they can respawn in some cases. I think every level's got like some example of an infinite respawning guard somewhere. Whether alarms go off, whether cameras go off, whether certain objectives fail, or standing in front of a certain door, or miscellaneous. But what really got me with GoldenEye though for the N64 was, even though I mostly played on an emulator, I've noticed that, if like one of the things that I think Rareware could have checked in some cases was that if you're gonna make a game, it's gotta be like really well balanced. Now, I mean, not because the game can't be beaten, because I mean, obviously you can beat this game, but it's a perfect example that retro games really were fucking hard, even if you knew what you were doing. Because like what was funny is like take Control for example. I mean, there's certain parts of that level that are sort of luck based, and I swear it's not because of Natalia, but like when the guards come down, you don't really know where they're gonna be. Sometimes they run on the opposite side of the room. Sometimes they just run straight to you. But the ones that have the hats on always go for you, and the ones that go for Natalia are the ones that don't have the hats on. But it's funny because even on Double Agent, there could be times when the AI will sort of rush you, and one guard can hit you 5 times, deplete half your health, and just fucking kill you. And it sucks because you know that this shit, they're able to do this shit because they're got I think it's 83% accuracy or something like that. I don't know what the reaction speed is, but it's just for one of the last levels in the game, it's pretty fucking high. And I mean, Cradle's another good example. I mean, the guards won't shoot you if they don't have a straight shot, but it's but it's funny because as far as the N64 RAM goes, or not the CPU and the specs, but it's as well as there's so much lag on the Cradle. But what's really interesting is it's possible when you're playing that game, for example, you'll notice that the AI never misses, and then it seems out of all the enemies in the game, even the ones on the Aztec level, they will get more shots in on you, and it's not because the amount of ammo that these DMGs hold, for example. It's actually based on it's just it's in Perfect Dark where they took out the incivility frames. There are some levels on Perfect Agent mode where one guard can kill you in less than a fucking second with full health. And it sucks because it's the whole reason why you can't beat that game in some cases. I mean it's possible, but it's probably the hardest game that Rareware has ever made. Because you have to know what you're up against, and even that still it's just unbelievable how fucking fast you'll die in that game. And it's a really good game too. The guards will just fuck you over just like that. And I tell you, I love games that are really hard to beat. But at the same time, holy shit, man, some of those games are hard. And, I mean, they're not as hard as F-Zero, but I'll tell you, even though F-Zero isn't even though F-Zero is not an FPS or a first-person shooter, it's a racing game, But what I'm trying to say, though, is this. If you're going to make a game where, you're going to run into a bunch of enemies that are going to kill you, essentially what you should do is you should balance out the incivility frames. I mean, yeah, if you want to make a game where the enemies have really high accuracy and reaction speed, sure, go ahead. I'm not saying you can't do that. But what I'm saying though is maybe give the character the ability to sort of there's a little bit more recovery time, to get out of the way and stuff. Because I mean, I know in real life, if you shoot someone, obviously there's probably a good chance they'll die. But at the same time, or you can at least slow them down anyways. But but in a video game though, it's that kind of logic. I mean, depending on the physics engine, of course. I swear some of these games, man, people they don't really test this out. I swear it's some of these games are it's they didn't test it out enough. Not because the game's not good, but just because maybe they overlook certain details, and that's the reason why some games, I swear, that's why some games are harder than they should be. Not because you can't beat them, but because somebody overlooks something, and that's possible. Because again, when you look at Perfect Dark, if you watch the interviews from like Rare themselves, the people that actually worked on the game, it's like they made a great game, but they put so much stuff in that game, and they couldn't. I mean, I can see that they didn't test everything out, but I tell you, man, there's so many things they still wanted to put in that game too. They really wanted to put a lot of things in that game, keep you busy with it. But it's just, if you're gonna play a game, man, you really gotta watch what you do, because some of those games, they're so hard that like only so many people can beat them. And again, I know that that's not entirely true, because again, it's not impossible to beat that game. I mean, you could beat it, but at the same time, though, it's like that's what you're dealing with when you play like games like Perfect Dark and GoldenEye and stuff like that. You have to just know the game. And again, before you play any game, I mean, I'll give you another example of a game that's really fucking difficult. It would be like Star Ocean 2, for example. All the Star Ocean games are just really crazy difficult when they jump up in difficulty. Like, it's funny because, like, once you get to the final dungeon in Star Ocean 2, or near the end of the game, you have to fight what is known as the 10 Wise Men. There's 3 battles, technically, you have to fight. There's the battle against, I forget his name already. I forget all their names except for a few of them. But the thing is, there's 10 of them you gotta kill. The way this works is, the first one you fight has no shirt on, he's got long hair, he's like a samurai. So you kill him. Then there's another one you kill where he sort of levitates and he's like a machine. Then you fight another guy that has like a sword and shield, which is another really crazy one. And then later on, when you storm the actual enemy base where you gotta go kill the remainder of them, you gotta fight 3 of them at the same time. And then you gotta fight 2 of them. Then you gotta fight 1 of them, Lucifer. And then you gotta fight their leader, Indelcio. Now, what's really interesting in Star Ocean 2 is the reason why I like how this game does difficulty, because the game has more than one. The game has 3 difficulty options. There's easy, normal, and hard mode. There's Earth, Galaxy, and Universe, retrospectively. Later on in the series, the game would eventually get a new difficulty called 4D mode, which means the game's even more ridiculous, or Chaos mode, whatever. Actually, no, I think even in Star Ocean 5 there was 4D mode, and then there was Chaos mode. So I think it goes up, and I think there's 5 difficulties, or maybe Chaos mode was renamed for difficulty, or 4D mode. But essentially, it's supposed to be a joke based on like the dimensions and all that, and space, like how the universe is infinite. So you got like the 3rd dimension and the 4th dimension. I mean, that's essentially where it comes from. You got Earth, like Earth mode, like where we live, is easy mode, and then it's supposed to be like, depending on the size, eventually it gets really hard. But it's interesting because, like, when you think about Star Ocean games, like, the game itself gets hard, and then you have the difficulty you're playing on, which makes it even more ridiculous. And what's really interesting in Star Ocean 2, there's a boss called Indelcio Unlimited, or with his limiter off, meaning, like, there's two ways you can fight this guy. You got his normal form, and then you got his unlimited form. Now, his unlimited form, he's the only enemy in the game that technically gets stats. There's 2 multipliers for his stats. There's the second form he has. Mind you, you have to trigger 2 cutscenes in order to fight this guy, and it's not like you kill his first form. And then his second form, it's actually you'll either fight his first or his second form. And his second form is really like, him being who he is, but he fights at full power, and he doesn't hold back, and he's got all the spells. His stats are tripled. His HP is tripled as well, and so is his MP. But at the same time, though, if you're playing on Universe mode, his stats triple even further, or double. Except he's got like max stats literally, and he can kill you in like 5 seconds. It's funny because like he moves so goddamn fast that like you can't beat him. But you'd also have to, like, this is like one of those boss fights where, like, you gotta, like, get everything in the game, max out your skills, and figure out who you want to really use for this fight. And it's still not, and I'm gonna tell you right now, it's still not easy to beat him. I got a video on my channel if you want to look it up. This is a good example of, like, how to make a really, really hard video game. He's supposed to be, mages in general, when you think of, like, spellcasters in Star Ocean, or just video games in general, they're usually a pain in the ass to beat when it comes to melee fighters, because they usually don't have, like But melee fighters usually win because, I mean, unless of course you're dealing with a really fast spellcasting mage, you can easily kill them with melee attacks because, like, they could just hand them really fast with, like, sword fighters, for example. Like the Tale series has it all the time. But what's really interesting though is in the Star Ocean series though, that's not necessarily the case. You could have mages and then they'll just get killed by, like. But what Delcio does is he has, like, melee attacks and spells. And it really sucks because, like, when you're fighting him, like, he literally moves like he's manipulating the speed of light. Like, he can teleport really fast. He can cast spells while moving, which is kind of something I haven't seen in any other game, and I'm kind of shocked I haven't seen that. It's actually a really cool concept, but it's really dangerous too. And he moves really fast. He also can spellcast. Yeah, he can spellcast so fast that he can do that. But more importantly, what I think is really crazy is, aside from that, he's able to spellcast. He's able to spellcast. He's able to move very fast. And his stats are so damn high that they can, like, literally almost one-hit kill your characters if that's how that goes. And what's even more ridiculous is that Delcio has this ability where you can't stun lock him. Like, literally as soon as he stops taking damage, he's already moving again. So there's no, like extra time to, like, stun him. Like, as soon as you have to have, like, 3 characters, like, using, like, these really hard to reach combos and, like, just keep pausing the screen. And it's like, this boss fight's just insane. Like, it really is. Because it takes you, like, 20 minutes to kill this guy. This is with the spell animations included. I mean, if you trap him and you can drain all his health, if you do a reasonable enough damage, you can kill him in, like, less than 3 minutes. But that's, like, really hard to do. And I mean, I'm not, like, an expert on how to do that. There is a couple videos on YouTube of somebody doing that where, like, they didn't let him cast any spells and they somehow managed to trap him in a combo lock. So that was actually pretty cool. But, like, there's another good example of, like, how to make a really hard game, really hard boss, if you want to go by that. Like, some games are just, like, harder than they should be because, like, the game designers, like, because the thing is, like, when you make a game, it can be anything you want it to be. You can essentially make a game as hard as you want it to be. But the thing is, though, you have to balance it out somehow. Like, I mean, what I mean by that, and again, that's, like, the hardest part of this video to really send to people, is that we really have to understand that concept. If you want to make a game hard, it's important to, again, balance out the enemy's stats, but at the same time, as long as it's possible to beat, as long as somebody can still do it, then I'd say you did a really good job with it. As long as it's not impossible to beat, then, there you go. There's a good example of, like, where you can really draw your line at and say, okay, is this balanced, is it not? Because some games, man, some games are really crazy. Some fan-made games are really, like, maybe they're just really insufferable. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that they're not fun to play. I'll give you an example. Like, take A Link to the Past, for example. Parallel Worlds. There was a ROM hack somebody made a long time ago. I forget exactly what year it came out in. There's The Legend of Zelda Parallel Worlds for the and Super Nintendo. It was like one of the. And I don't know, like, it's supposed to be, like, in your face, like, really, really hard Zelda hack. It's, like, supposed to kill, it's like Kaizo Mario style, but in The Legend of Zelda. And what's really interesting is, like, they have, like, the first dungeon you'll go to, and, like, there's, like, all of these fucking guards, and they can just one hit, like, they can kill you, you don't get a sword. And I think the mechanics of A Link to a Past were actually changed, too, compared to the original. But what I'm saying, though, is if you've never played those games, that's essentially what you're looking at here when you play that. That's something else that you really have to take into consideration when you play, when you watch or you play, like, some of these fan-made games that people have made over the years. You really have to take them seriously because you really never know what they might have accomplished in them. And that's an example of something that you should really take seriously when you make a patch or you make some sort of a really tempted hard ROM hack, because some games, like, they're not hard, like, you can't beat them, but it's like, but they're obviously, like, because they're fan-made games, they're, like, supposed to kill you as much as possible. Another good example would be, like, I Want to Be the Fan game, or I Want to Be the Bashi, I Want to Be the Guy, those style of games, where, like, you have to, like, maneuver through puzzles and all that, and, like, and it's supposed to be like a comical sort of game where like you'll die in like all these funny ways, and it's interesting. It really is. But but some games, like it's crazy to think like some people like they can make a game that's like so hard that like it'd take like many attempts before you beat it. And especially speedrunning, you have that issue a lot. Whether it's not the RNG, but like maybe the physics engine and maybe the game development itself was, it's a good game, but it's like maybe you might have you might run into some problems because like maybe the game wasn't really meant to be speedrun, like that kind of. So you got that kind of mentality. So again, so what we have so far is, again, it depends on the physics engine, it depends on the choice of the game designers, depends on how the game runs, depends on the console, depending on what it was released for. If you're not having like limitations, like Nintendo, the thing that I'm scared of is like sometimes you might actually see certain games get downgraded because they can't run on a certain console. So like maybe some games might actually have limitations of some kind, and maybe that might actually penalize the player if something like that ever were to happen in an attempt to make the game look, because again, as far as game development goes, if there's any sort of lag, the game's going to favor the AI more than you, because it's using the RAM in order to program the computer AI to do what it's doing to you, but it's not going to be able to read your commands, and you might actually think your controller's busted over something like that. Another good example could be Perfect Dark. If you actually could make the game lag to the point where it's like your controller's not responding, it's because like the command modules for like the AI are always in the game, and the AI is always using that, and and that's loaded first, then your command, so it kind of looks like you're not doing anything in a laggy situation while the AI is like literally like doing all this stupid shit, and they could be fucking killing you instead. Like I'll give you an example. Like there's some parts of Perfect Dark that do this on the N64, and what's really interesting is that because the N64 is hardware, you can play it on Project 64 or Muppin 64, whatever the other emulator's called. And it's funny because like this shit actually can happen. Like you'll have like guards, like literally like the game will just be lagging to hell in some cases. Only if you have like 20 something guards on screen, and they'll just fucking kill you because like the game's lagging to let them attack, and they just don't fucking miss. And then it's bullshit because you can't really get out of that situation because of that. So it's like you got to run to a different part of the level and just take them all out, like, kind of like if you've ever seen the movie 300, where like the Spartans were like when they were fighting the Persians at first, where like they backed themselves into that little corner and they were fighting like all the Persians in that just one little part of the wall, the crack in the wall. If you remember that part, if anybody remembers that part of the movie, but. It's crazy to think that like you could have like a bunch of people make a video game, and yet some of these designs go unnoticed. Some people don't really check. So yeah, so we have that. And then another issue could be is that maybe the stats are too high, or maybe they give them too much HP. Like okay, so like time wise, some bosses might only take like maybe like 10 minutes to kill. Some of them might even take like more like an hour, and that actually might take a while to beat. Another example could be like some games are like what's really interesting is some games don't actually have this problem, but like what's really interesting is like some games might actually require like the player could get killed in like 5 seconds, and then there's like certain boss fights where like maybe they might have like a one-hit kill spell and they can end the battle like within like 5 seconds versus like what you're doing, and it's actually really interesting when you think about it. So there's another way that could go wrong. Another thing that I think is really interesting about like the way certain games are designed is that some games like they'll literally have like certain bosses attack so fast that they can also kill you. Even in turn-based RPG style. Like for example, Neo, if you ever played Final Fantasy V, the remakes later on, because they don't have this in the original Final Fantasy V, like there's a boss called Shinru. Shinryu? Ryu? Yeah. Shinryu, which is a really strong dragon. I mean, like, if you fight the original Shinryu, in the rift near the end of the game in Omega, what's really interesting is, like, unless you know how to kill them fast, they'll kill you so fast that the game will just kill you. And that's actually really scary when you think about it. And, you know, Final Fantasy V also had a boss in the remakes called Neo Shinru and Omega MK2, and they were also really hard bosses of their original counterparts. So what's really interesting is Omega MK2 would immediately use Barrier Change, and then it would start using Rocket Punch and like Vacuum Wave, and it would just, like, these are attacks that would just take like 1/4 of your health away, and they would just kill you instantly. And it's just funny because, like, you know, most games don't do this shit, you know, like, they're supposed to be optional bosses, but it's funny because, like, you know, as soon as the battle starts, you just die instantly. It doesn't matter if you're on level 99, doesn't matter if you're on level 50, you are fucked when you fight some of these bosses. And I always thought it was really interesting because Neo Shinru, for example, you know, he can cast Meteor, Comet, he could cast Big Guard, he could cast Poison Breath. I don't know if he could use Giga Flare if he died. You know, it's like he was just in your face, like he would just annihilate you if you didn't have the right stats. And even still, he would still kill you really fast because he got like 3 attacks in like 5 seconds. It's scary. But I'll give you another example of a boss that's like really, really difficult. Going back to Omega MK2, for example, was another good example of this. No, Shinru, the original Shinru, when you fight him in the Rift. What's funny is, the way it's programmed, he immediately uses Tidal Wave. So unless you're using one of the coral rings that prevent you from, like, taking water damage, he does like an insane 7,000, 800,000 damage, or like 7,000, 8,000 damage, and he just kills everybody instantly as soon as the battle starts. It's like, you know, you don't even get a chance to attack this guy. He just immediately starts off. You know, I've even played like Final Fantasy V a couple times a long time ago, and I remember like when you're going through the ancient library when you got to go rescue, I forget his name. And, you know, speaking of this video, I really want to play Final Fantasy V all over again once I get done watching this, you know, making this video. But it's like, I can't tell you how many times, like, you know, like, you might be familiar with the spells that are like level 5 death, for example. Like, if your levels are divisible by 5, you instantly get hit by it and die. And it's funny because there was times when I was just running through the fucking dungeon, and the one thing I'd be scared of is as soon as I hit level 25, I'd have to get to the nearest save room because I'd kill like every single boss, every single character, you know, because I like the level grinding games. I like to do that shit. And what's funny is there was one time where I was literally level 25. All my characters were, because again, you know, the way Final Fantasy works is like, you know, as long as your characters don't die, they have the same amount of experience and they'll hit level 25 at the same time as long as they're still alive. As long as they don't die once, right? So what happened was one of my characters, they all hit level 25. I didn't get a single game over on that fucking run. And as soon as I got to that fucking ancient library or whatever it was called, I literally, like, I was trying to go, you know, the same one where you go fight Ifrit in the, I think, yeah, the same one where you got to find, you can fight, get the summoner class and all that, when you're trying to free the crystals. And it was funny because, like, you know, Final Fantasy V was never really a hard game for the most part. You know, and again, Final Fantasy V with all the jobs and all that, if you remember that you know, where you had Bartz and Lena, Faris and Galoof, and then soon later Carly, or how do you pronounce her name? I mean, the thing that really got me about Final Fantasy V, that really stuck me, was that as soon as I hit level 25, though, I mean, there was that one part, I saved my game, so it wasn't really like too much of a loss, but as soon, like, some of the enemies on that game, though, like, all they had to do was cast level 5 instant death, and that was like the first fucking attack. As soon as the battle started, there was nothing you could do about it. Everybody was fucking dead because I got hit by it. And I remember making a video. It was like one of the fastest game over in video game history, or like, you know, and I just kind of made like a 5-second video of like just skipping to that part where that fucking happened. And I just thought to myself, like, like, yeah, that's possible. You can do that in Final Fantasy V. It's possible that as you're running through the ancient library, there's this. It's called page. I think it's page 64 is the enemy. It's supposed to be like this blue devil and all that, and you can see like half his eyes, and he's like, you know, the way his sprite is. You're fighting him on a book, and like his you know, he comes out of the book and all that, and he's like a blue devil. You can see the horns and all that, but then he can cast level 5 instant death or level 5 death, and it's a blue mage spell. It's a reoccurring one in the series. But it was like, you know, I mean, I don't know if the game designers just overlooked it, but like, you know, I got fucked with a level. I just got instant death. Everybody got killed instantly, and it just sucked. I remember somebody posting on not Facebook, but YouTube. They say, "Thanks for making me hate my final game. I'm never gonna look at this the same way ever again." And it's like, you know, all because of that fucking probability and repetition. It's like, I mean, that's a good example of someone getting screwed big time in a video game. Thankfully, I saved. Otherwise, I would have been like the first time I played that game, I was like, holy shit, I can't believe that could fucking happen. So, here's something that you really got to watch out for when you make video games. You got to make sure that, you know, people have a fair chance. If you can balance that out, people will always win. But at the same time, though, you want to give something that will give people a run for their money. But anyway, it's not unbalanced. It's essentially the idea. You know, so time, AI programming, make sure there's no glitches, make sure enemies, you know, try to cut back on how many different ways that there are to kill the boss. Don't let them, like, again, don't let the enemies, you know, don't let the people that make the games, you know, find loopholes where, like, or the people that are playing the games, like, where they can just kill them with a glitch or kill them with, like, an instant death spell. I'll give you another example. In Final Fantasy X International in the HD remake, later on in the PAL version, there's a boss called Pans, for example, after you kill the Dark Aeons. You know, Pans is a really hard boss. It's probably one of the hardest bosses in the entire Final Fantasy series. But what's really funny, though, is you can actually kill him with the Zenmato level 7 and above, I believe is what it is. And there's another example of doing this in Final Fantasy II. Not Final Fantasy IV on the Super Nintendo, but Final Fantasy II on the PSP. And there's a boss called Jitterbug. And he's like really, really hard to kill. But if you have like a level 7 teleportation spell, there's a chance you can kill him instantly by warping him to another dimension, which is actually really useful because that boss is hard. But you know, it's just to give you an example of like what to do. Like, I mean, if you really want somebody to fight, like a really hard boss could be like just fighting the boss normally, like, you know, like not using instant death spells or, you know, but sometimes the game designers will leave those options in there probably just because they know that some people might not be able to beat these spells and they want people to at least say they beat it, you know. So, but the way I look at it, I mean, you know, if you're going to make a video game, you just got to really look these things over. Think about what's going to make this boss hard, and think about like what possibilities the players might have up until that point. And hopefully this helps, because I know for me this was really useful. So again, comment, rate, subscribe, favorite, share. If you have anything else to add to this video, if you have any requests, videos, just let me know. I'll make them. But this is just a really cool idea that I thought I'd make because I was playing video games one day and I thought, well, you know, these are just kind of some things to think about if you're going to make a boss that's really hard, balance the game out, or just for whatever reason maybe make a stupid challenge of your own if you're saying like I am. Like, you know, like I like to do, and upload it to YouTube so people would watch that and say, oh, hey, no one's ever done that before.